We don't want to do anything you don't want us to do.
Oh, when God just leave that Abraham alone. He wants a son, he wants a son. Everybody wants a home. Though I'm not quite sure if poor Isaac would agree. My God, he said, what did I do to make you want to watch me bleed? And I feel sick tonight, I feel just like the dancing flame on funeral light. I'm not sure if I want you to save me, and I'd be less uptight if I knew the sight of blood was just a weakness and not the whole reason that you made me, 'cause sometimes I think it is. Oh, when God just go and leave me all alone. I'm not your son, I'm not your son. Everybody dies alone. Was this world just not quite hard enough for you? I guess like anyone, you've got your own scores to settle too. And I'm so pissed tonight, I feel just like the last remaining Canaanite. Don't think that I will be returning. And if you want to see the irony, savage price of piety, there's a lot of us who are going to be burning. How does it feel? The sorrow that I know when I'm alone I can't express, and these darling angels singing in my ear is the comfort of their touch. It cuts right through this emptiness. It's everything I want and everything I fear. But I don't fear God. Ooh, 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 ooh. The child was my friend. I spent a long time with his curse. I can feel him trembling beneath his plea. I don't know if there is water, all I know is there's a thirst, and it might be for the best, though I'm not quite sure if Isaac would agree. What a cheerful song.
Good morning. My name is Linda Leibel, and I serve as the president of the Board of Trustees of the Unitarian Universalist Church. Thanks for joining us today, and happy spring. We are in person and online today. It's wonderful to be together. Weather permitting, we will continue to offer in-service outdoor services on May 2nd and May 16th. All services will also be live streamed. If the weather is bad, we'll live stream only. We'll follow all public health protocols to keep everyone safe. Bring a chair, wear a mask, and social distance. This is a wonderful way to be together safely. Thanks to everyone who's worked so hard to make it possible. I have a few announcements. On Wednesday, April 21st at 7 p.m., we'll have a special joint adult enrichment social justice program that is very timely in our national context. Eva Keith and Omani Abdul from the Ubuntu Institute for Community Development will speak with us on their efforts around and for the need to recognize human rights, reparations, and the International Decade for People of African Descent 2015-2024. They'll share information about the International Bill of Rights with a specific focus on International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and how it relates to our human rights. Come hear our neighbors share about their centuries-long work to restore justice and human dignity to our nation. You can contact Jim Scanlon at ae@uucs.org for the Zoom details. On Sunday, May 2nd at 12:15 after the service, we'll hold our 4th congregational dialogue on becoming an anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural congregation. These dialogues have been rich, challenging, and open, with all views welcome and a spirit of community filling the conversation. Even if you haven't attended the previous dialogues, join us on May 2nd. All people are invited. Our church retreat at the mountain is scheduled for October 29th to the 31st, 2021. If we're far enough along in the pandemic with the vaccinations and immunity, this retreat is planned to take place. Please see the flyers at the back of the Sunday order of service for the details. Come for the whole weekend or come for one day, make it a Saturday trip for our intergenerational church retreat. Our theme is Beloved Community, and we'll spend our time relaxing, hiking, crafting, playing games, making music, and connecting more deeply with one another. After over a year of quarantine and being apart, this retreat seems more needed than ever. Partial scholarships are available to help with the cost. Please see either Scott or Sybil for a confidential conversation on requesting a scholarship support. And today, after our service here, we're getting ready for our annual UUCS auction. Yeah, finally. I want to introduce our stewardship chair, Brandon Carter. Where is he? This guy, give him a hand. He has worked so hard to do this.
Just a couple of quick things for those that may be at home watching this. There's still time to get here. If you are local, the live auction doesn't actually start until 12:30, so you can actually finish the service if you're close enough, jump in your car, head over and get here in time for the festivities. If you are here, hopefully part of the reason that you are here is because you want to either participate in the auction today or you want to sit back and watch all the fun. So thank you for being here, and I just wanted to give a quick update. We've still had people donating towards the auction even this morning through donations, but so far through our First Fridays events that started back in November, so many of you have donated items and have been purchasing items for months now, and we have finally made it to our live in-person auction event that's been much anticipated. We had lots of lively bidding and competition over the last 2 days in our online auction. And so far to date, as of right now, we have raised $8,622 towards our annual auction. And we still have the live auction today to go. So with your help, we are hoping to exceed the goal that we had set, which is only a little bit away. So after the service is over with, I will come back up, and for those that are here, kind of give some orientation, kind of how things will work, but you'll need to get bidder numbers if you don't have those. We'll have refreshments in the meantime, and it'll be about 30 minutes that we can kind of hang out before the actual auction begins. So thank you.
Good morning. We are so glad that you decided to be a part of our congregation this morning. It is a beautiful day for us to join together, both here on the back lawn and via live stream. No matter how we are together today, we are connected in community. The sun is shining, the birds are singing, the azaleas are blooming. Unfortunately, the pollen is overwhelming, but I do think it's worth it. While we should really do this every day, this week we celebrate Earth Day. We owe so much to her, yet as a society, we do so much damage. She is our home, and she gives us so much. As Einstein says, look deep into nature and you will understand everything better. Nature definitely gives me a place to practice some self-care, to recenter, and understand things better. Let's take a moment and recognize the beauty of this place in which we gather, this sacred grove. Sadly, week after week, We seem to have names to share in our grim litany of mass shootings and killings at the hands of police. There have been 147 mass shootings in the U.S. in 2021, 45 of them since March 16th, when 8 people were killed just down the road in Atlanta. I already had a list of names to read, and then saw that there was another shooting early this morning in Kenosha, Wisconsin, leaving at least 3 people dead. The news is wearying, but let us bring our siblings to mind. The unarmed 13-year-old in Chicago, Adam Toledo. The 20-year-old dad from Minneapolis who was shot at a traffic stop, Dante Wright. And the mass shooting at the FedEx warehouse in Indianapolis, Matthew R. Alexander, Samaria Blackwell, Amarjeet Johal, Jasvinder Kaur, Jaswinder Singh, Amarjeet Sekon, Carly Smith, and John Weissert. The suspect then killed himself at the scene, and his name is Brandon Scott Hull. The Indianapolis mass shooting hits close to home for me. I've spent a fair amount of time in that city over the past 3 years, as that is where my seminary is located. Several of my school colleagues were among the faith leaders who were at the Holiday Inn where families were gathering to find out if their family member had been killed in the shooting. One of my closest friends says she will never unhear the sound of the helpless cry of a mother who has learned that her child is gone. These days are heavy for so many. I hope you will continue to hold these families close and continue to say their names. As you might imagine, Scott and I communicate a good bit throughout each week, via text, emails, phone calls, meetings. I often worry that I bother him, but he assures me that I don't. A couple of weeks ago in Scott's welcome, he mentioned that he thinks of some wonderful and funny names for this church. In the past weeks, in one of our text conversations, we were discussing how this church is so good at saying yes. There are so many examples. When it became clear that it would be impossible to choose just one social justice project for the year, we said yes to all of them. When our Latinx siblings asked if we would host a COVID vaccine clinic for their community, we said yes. We say yes to each other, to showing up to make the world more livable for everyone, for our children to be free, critical thinkers with generous hearts and to thrive, for voting justice, for the earth, for Black lives, for LGBTQ+ lives, for immigrants, for each of us, you and me. We say yes. So Scott and I have started calling this beautiful place Yes, Yes, CS instead of UUCS. When we share exciting news with each other, we often include this new name. This church says yes, and it is a beautiful thing. It allows us to do so much in our local community and the greater global community. 2 weeks ago, I shared with you about the opportunity I had to participate in a call with the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborship Partnerships, where President Biden showed up, and the things he was encouraging faith communities to do in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been doing them, some for over a year. As I finished that call, I texted Scott and told him about it, and we both said, yes, yes, yes. This week, I was a part of a Zoom conversation through my seminary with a few other students, alumni, and faculty, and the guest speaker for the Faith in Action Spring Conference that was happening later that day. The Faith in Action Project at Christian Theological Seminary is dedicated to helping spark a revolution of hope by bringing together faith communities, nonprofit organizations, and leaders in business and government in a collaborative effort to disrupt the cycle of poverty and overcome systemic injustice. Nisha Patel, an anti-poverty advocate and former executive director of the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, and the director of the Office of Family Assistance under the Obama administration, was the speaker. During this conversation, she emphasized the importance of deep listening. Even as an expert in her field, she doesn't believe she has all the answers. She believes that we must engage with and listen to the people who live it every day. As she spoke about this and other pieces, I kept thinking, we are doing these things at UUCS. So again, I texted Scott, and again we said, yes, yes, yes. As I continue to engage in these calls, I am so proud to be a part of this church. We're not perfect, but I can honestly say that we are doing the work, the really hard work of making this world more livable for all. So thank you. Thank you for being people of deep care for each other and the wider world. And thank you for joining us this morning. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Mel Fritchie, and I'm delighted to be serving as the worship associate this morning. This morning, we are learning about wounded healers. Alcoholics Anonymous is a paradigm of wounded healers, of those who bear a wound, offering healing to themselves and others. I'm going to read the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am among the people who had preconceived notions about what that group did, preconceived notions about religious aspects of the group, and had been one of the people that heard about the 12 steps but really never knew what they were. Fortunately, the first time I heard the 12 steps was sitting in a room filled with these wounded healers who spoke these steps together. Please call that image to mind as you listen to these steps. And if you're hearing them for the first time, enjoy. Number 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Number 2, we came to believe and accept that we needed strengths beyond our awareness and resources to restore us to sanity. 3, we made a decision to entrust our will and our lives to the care of the collective wisdom and resources of those who have searched before us. 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, we admitted to ourselves without reservation and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we were ready to accept help in letting go of all of our defects of character. 7, with humility and openness, we sought to eliminate our shortcomings. 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them. 9, we made direct amends to such people whenever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11, we sought through meditation to improve our spiritual awareness and our understanding of the AA way of life, and to discover the power to carry that way of life. 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs.
God said to Abraham, kill me a son. Abe says, man, you must be putting me on. God said, no. Abe said, what? God said, you can do what you want, babe, but next time you see me running, you better run. Well, Abe said, where you want this killing done? God says, out on Highway 61. Well, Georgia Sammy had a bloody nose. Welfare department wouldn't give him no clothes. He asked poor Howard, where can I go? Howard said, there's only one place I know. Sam said, tell me quick, man, I gotta run. Oh, Howard just pointed with his gun and said, out on Highway 61. Well, Mac the Finger said to Louis the King, I got 40 red, white, and blue shoestrings and 1,000 telephones that don't ring. Do you know where I can get rid of these things? And Louis the King said, let me think a minute, son. He said, yes, I think it can be easily done. Just take everything down to Highway 61. Now the 5th daughter on the 12th night told the first father that things weren't right. My complexion, she said, is a little too white. He said, come here and step into the light. He says, you're right, just let me tell the second mother it's been done. But the second mother was with the 7th son, and they were both out on Highway 61. Now the roving gambler, he was very bored, trying to create the next world war. Found a promoter, nearly fell off the floor. Never engaged in this kind of thing before, but yes, I think it can be very easily done. We'll just put some bleachers out in the sun and have it down on Highway 61.
Thank you. Our covenant, crafted by this congregation, provides the practical guidance of how we live together in community. If you are hearing these words for the first time, this is who we aspire to be. These words, as we speak them each week in unison, remind us of the constant work and reevaluation we must do to stay in community. Like the 12 steps spoken at the beginning of each AA meeting, these words serve as our guide for living. Let us join our voices and speak the truth of our covenant. We are a people of faith and hope. Together we covenant to strive to become our better selves, to honor both the critical mind and the generous heart, to prove that diversity need not mean divisiveness, and to respond to systems of violence and oppression with the power of a love beyond belief. There is something new in your order of service this week. Do you see what it says next? It says, I believe, greeting one another. Now, in the past, for those of you who are new with us today, this has been a wild festival of hugs that many introverts have tried to run from. We are outside, we are masked, many of us are vaccinated, but we are still mindful of the care that we provide. Over a year ago, Stacy Jackson and I demonstrated in our last in-person service new ways to greet one another. Because it has been over a year ago, we are going to review those ways now. Step number 1, make sure that your mask is firmly in place. Step number 2, make eye contact with the person that you are attempting to greet. Step number 3, ask them if they would like to be greeted safely by you. Stacy, oh my gosh, it's so good to see you. Can I give you an elbow? A bow? Turn around. A COVID hug? Or, for the introverts, a wave. When I release you in just a moment, you may use the time to greet one another. But we have just a few things that we're gonna mash into what I hope is not an unruly free-for-all that Scott will have to somehow manage to get you back. We welcome you here, whoever you are, whomever you love, and wherever you are. We are so glad you are with us in person. We are glad that you are joining us virtually, live, or whenever your life allows it. Even though we are apart, this is a time that we make sacred together. Breathe in the joy of this community that remains together. As we are greeting one another, we also take a moment to honor all of our joys and concerns, celebrating the love we give one another by making an offering to our beautiful, beautiful rippling bowl, brought to you by Stacy. Offer your own prayer, wish, spell, or burden at home. We are with you. We will also take a moment to share our work. Our Share the Plate this month is in support and celebration of the Mother's Day Bailout Program. If you have not gone to their website to check out this group, I encourage you to do so. The link can be found at nationalbailout.org. This is a Black-led, Black-centered collective working to end pretrial detention and mass incarceration of our Black siblings. Their work is our work. please come and bring your gifts, yourself, and your love. And if you are an introvert cringing behind your mask right now, please stay in your seat.
Rise and greet.
My blood doth rise in the roots of yon oak. Her sap doth run in my veins. Boundless my soul like the open sky, where the stars forever have lain. Where the stars, where the stars, where the stars forever have lain. My hands hold the weavings of time without end, my side as deep as the sea. Beating my heart sounds the measures of old and of love's eternity. That of love, that of love, that of love's eternity. I feel the tides as they answer the moon, rushing on a far distant sand. Winging a song is the wind in my breast, and my love blows over the land. And my love, and my love, and my love blows over the land. My foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day. Foot carries days of the old into new. Our dreaming shows us the way. Wondrous our faith settles deep in the earth, rising green to bring a new day. Rising green, rising green, rising green to bring a new day.
2-minute warning, 2-minute warning.
Everything was blowing.
Let's give Cindy a round of applause for like an 8-minute improvisation.
I noticed he stopped me when I started playing the X-Files theme song.
Felt like coming home. Sydney and Aaron have done an incredible job with some very difficult songs this month, working together. It's been really wonderful. Share silence with me. On the last day of Passover and on Easter, in the fullness of spring, we gathered here on the lawn 2 weeks ago, and we talked about the overwhelming violence of the world and the ways in which the stories of our Western tradition, of Judaism and Christianity and Islam, and of secular humanism, which is a prophetic redress of those traditions, trying to draw out their best ethical principles when they have failed so much in practice. That the stories of each of those four traditions, all of which are a part of our tradition and of our congregation, is that in the face of that overwhelming violence, small groups of people can reach out their hand and push back. Contrary to all probability, contrary to all reason, we are able to transform that violence into a more livable world, even just for a moment, over and over again. Pushing back. That is the heart of those stories. And then last week, on the eve of Ramadan, we worked with this foundational story of the Western tradition, so difficult, so fraught, story of the binding of Isaac, the Akedah, where in subservience to a religious ideal, a father is willing to murder his own son. And we talked about how we reach out our hand to stop the blade, the way this story recurs throughout our history, and how the primary interpretation of the story, whatever we believe, is to reach out our hand and stop violence wherever we see it reaching out its hand. Wherever we see that blade, we stop it. Today we are going to work with the hardest aspect of this, not just the overwhelming violence of the world, and not just the critical necessity that we intervene wherever we see that threat, but locating that violence also in us. This is the hardest work. I want to thank Mary Underwood for purchasing this sermon at our auction more than a year ago, and for waiting for more than a year for us to do this work, trying to find the right timing, the right way to do it. It's very brave of her to ask. And the timing falls well for us. This April, Passover and Easter and Ramadan and spring are all happening in this same month, within just a few weeks of each other. This is a good time to work with this story, this most difficult story. In each of these reflections, I've invited you to be in dialogue with me. If you have questions or if you want to push back against what I say, that I'm very willing to have that conversation with you, and many of you have. Somebody said to me this week, "Do you believe these stories?" That is a long conversation. It goes around the world more than once, through many books over 40 years and more. And I'm very glad to have that conversation with every single person here. But the answer is, that's not the point. The thing that I believe most is that it doesn't matter whether we believe these stories. Stories aren't meant to be believed in. They're meant to help us know how to live. These stories are about knowing how to live, and it's the choice of how we live that I think matters the most. That is what I really believe. So I want to share with you two stories today to emphasize this, that the key interpretation of these traditions, whatever we think about them, is how we live. You can see on the front of your bulletin, there's a picture by one of our most prominent Western artists, Rembrandt, a religious radical in his own right, in his own day, someone that we actually have a distant connection with through the radical tradition that emerges in us. He is connected to that. And that he spent so much time interpreting the story of Abraham and Abraham's family is indicative of how foundational this is in Western culture. You can see that, different from last week, when we had this horrifying picture of a father ready to sacrifice his own son, only being stopped at the last moment by an angel that has to do a full body bind on the man to stop him, throw himself in between. Today the image, both pictures by Rembrandt, today the image is of a father blessing his son. Isaac surviving the sacrifice, Isaac blessing his own son, Jacob, Abraham's grandson. It's a sweet image. And you can see Isaac's wife, Rebekah, Jacob's mother, standing there also, watching. Such a different image. But here's the thing about this image. Image so different from the violent image last week. This is a picture of deception. This is a picture of a mother and son collaborating with each other to trick the father and steal the blessing from Jacob's older brother Esau. This image that looks so sweet, so distant from that horribly violent image last week, is the next generation enacting that same violence all over again. Different form, still violence. This is a picture of theft. The story of Abraham and the binding of Isaac is not just a story of one small group of people, a father and son and an angel on a mountain. It is a family tragedy. It's a story of family tragedy that goes on for generations. Isaac survives the incident, but in the story as it's told in the Hebrew scriptures, Isaac pretty much disappears from the picture at that point. He shows up every now and then, but he's a very passive figure. Can you imagine facing the threat of death at the hands of your own parent? Unfortunately, some of you can. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And Isaac never recovers from that. He fades into the background. The whole family suffers. The thing that happens right after the binding of Isaac in these stories is that Isaac's mother, Sarah, Abraham's wife, she dies. She just dies. Some interpreters in all three of these traditions that I've named say, well, of course, her son was just taken by her husband to be sacrificed. So we lose the mother right away. And then Isaac tries to find his way through, but he exercises very little agency. He is a deeply wounded person. And going forward, we are reminded that he's not even the first child Abraham did this to. There was an older brother, half-brother, named Ishmael, who also was sent out into the wilderness and only saved by death from an angel. Ishmael and Isaac are half-brothers, and they both suffer this terrible experience at the hand of their father, the person who in our tradition is proclaimed as the father of faith, the great patriarch of all three of these religions. This is a story of a family caught in cycles of violence that are tragic and that repeat. When Isaac has a family of his own, 2 sons are born, twins, Esau and Isaac. And the family descends into favoritism, just as Abraham had been willing to discard his first son, Ishmael, in favor of his younger son, Isaac. Ever seen that happen in a family? I could tell you some families where that's happened. So the same thing happens the next generation. Favorites are chosen. In this case, the mom chooses one favorite, the dad chooses another. How toxic. We know what that does to a family and to kids. And the mom actually coaches the younger son in how to steal the blessing from the older brother. Now, just think about this for a second. Have you ever seen 2 people pitted against each other? Have you ever seen an authority figure choose to distribute privileges to one person, withhold them from another? This stuff happens in our lives every day, right? You know what I'm talking about. We've all seen it. That is terribly violent and destructive and totally unnecessary. And when we look at the story in a bigger picture, we see where it's coming from. That's what was modeled before. And here it happens again. When the older brother realizes what's happened, that the blessing that was meant for him has been stolen, he goes, the word is very telling. We use it in our language. and named people who have suffered the result of this today. He goes ballistic. He is out for his brother's life. And this scoundrel who stole his brother's birthright, perpetuating his family's tragic cycle of violence, runs for his life and spends most of his life tricking people, stealing from people, running on his wits. You know that song that Sydney sang, Highway 61 Revisited? It is a totally bizarre song, isn't it? What the hell is Bob Dylan even talking about? Well, one of the reasons for selecting that song is that Dylan himself said it had a lot to do with addiction and delirium, with drug culture in the 60s. So it pairs really well with the AA reading. But the other is, in its bizarreness, ridiculousness, nonsense, and the strangeness of the verse, Dylan is giving us an entire history of violence in Western culture. He names it, the ways people manipulate each other, hurt each other, target each other, all the way from Abraham choosing his distant God as opposed to caring for his son, down to the present where we can design a world war and set out bleachers for it. Look at us now, bleachers for a world war. Living in these cycles of violence, overwhelming violence perpetuated from generation to generation. How do we stop it? How do we change that? I'll tell you another story, not from the Judeo-Christian tradition, but also at the root of the West, of our Western tradition, as foundational as the story of Abraham and Isaac. Ever heard about the face that launched 1,000 ships? Who was that? Helen of Troy, right? She had an affair with Paris and it started the Trojan War. Except that's not actually what happened. They did have an affair. Her husband Menelaus got really upset. He joined up with his brother Agamemnon, brothers again, and they pulled all the Greeks together to go to war against Troy, take down that great city. But there was a problem. Anybody know what the problem was? No wind for their sails. They couldn't get to Troy. They couldn't cross the sea because there was no wind blowing. So, of course, what Agamemnon does is to sacrifice his daughter, Iphigenia. The Trojan War happens because of a child sacrifice. And just so we keep things a little balanced, talking about this patriarchal God image from Abraham, it's the goddess Artemis who asked for this sacrifice, right? Patriarchy can show up in women too. Internalized oppression is a real thing. We need to be really careful about that. From that moment of child sacrifice, sacrificing a child for the political and martial military ambitions of these two brothers, and especially of Agamemnon the king, who wants to be king of all Greeks. We go to the Trojan War and a 10-year siege that ends in devastation. And you know, from that, Agamemnon goes back home, and he's murdered by his wife, who's upset that he murdered his daughter, their daughter. And then she's killed by their son. It's a whole other family tragedy, just like Abraham and his family. But for us, it goes on from there. The poet Virgil in Rome told that at the fall of the Trojan War, Aeneas escaped, prince of the Trojans, and he traveled all across the Mediterranean to finally come to what would become Rome. And the city of Rome was founded on refugees from the Trojan War who were escaping from this war that was started by child sacrifice, the death of Iphigenia. And the city of Rome itself founded on the abduction of women, kidnap, and sexual violence, and murder. And from the Roman Empire, Western culture spreads and becomes Roman Empire under Christendom through Constantine, and then reiterates as the second Holy Roman Empire in Western Europe. We have the Middle Ages. And fast forward to what we call the Third Roman Empire, or in our parlance, the Third Reich, It's a direct line of descent. And think about how many people are sacrificed in that for the sake of some political ideal. Cycles and cycles of violence. One of the best reads on racism and patriarchy in our own country is by a thinker named Resmaa Menakem, who charts the violence of our own country in our political systems, in our economics, in our love of guns, all of it, back to the tragic cycles of violence in Europe and the necessity of people in Europe to flee for self-preservation. But as we know in these generational cycles of violence, when one person's been hurt, it feels really good to hurt somebody else, make somebody else feel lower, right? So if I've been subjugated to a class structure in Europe, I can subjugate a bunch of people from another continent who look different than me, indigenous people or African people, and feel good about myself over here. Cycles and cycles of violence perpetuating what happened before. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's a horrible legacy. In these two stories, Judeo-Christian and pagan, the two roots of our culture, Hebrew and Greek, the sacrifice of a child leads to cycles of violence that perpetuate. And when will it ever stop? It feels hopeless. How would you ever stop it? Throughout all these stories, there is a hero. Not a brave hero. Not a god. Not a person of nobility. A person who's afraid. A person who's hurt. The wounded healer. I want you to think about wounds that you bear. I want you to think about wounds you've inflicted. Nobody has to tell their stories, just think about them. And think about the connection between them. How much, when we suffer a wound, how often we repeat that wound on someone else. If I was bullied, then I learned to bully somebody else. If I was treated to emotional abuse, then I treat someone else to emotional abuse. Cycles of debt. Cycles of pain. How often it is that we have suffered a wound, and how often it is that we've acted out of that wound and inflicted pain on another. It's very human of us. I know I have. I did it again yesterday with my family. It's so easy to do. The wounded healer is the person who stops to realize they have been wounded. And out of their wound, they are prone to inflict wounds on others. And so that singular individual, all alone in this massive history of generational violence, decides that with them it stops. With them it stops. However imperfectly, however incompletely. I mean, I fell into it again yesterday, folks. We're not going to get it right. Not 100%. To examine our own wound so that we don't perpetuate it on somebody else. So that the cycle stops with us. That's what's so brilliant about AA. Rooms full of hurt people. And it's not their fault that they got hurt. And at some point in their lives, they decided it has to stop with me. Whatever my life has been, however it is that I wound up here, it has to stop here with me. Choice of the individual. You can't get anybody in that room without their choice. And you can see in the 12 steps that are written there for you. I choose to confront the wound in myself and to make amends for those that I have hurt so that I learn not to do it again. confront the wound in me, apologize to those I've hurt, so that I don't do it again. And that changes the history. It turns the whole thing. It breaks generational cycles of violence. Sounds ridiculous. How could that be? But paradox is where spiritual truth is found in every single tradition. God or no God, I do not care. I honestly don't care. I don't care. I don't care. It's the spiritual truth that I care about. When we examine our wound and apologize for the ways we've worked out of that woundedness to hurt others, we break the cycle. And finally, Iphigenia rests in peace. Jacob, grandson of Abraham, son of Isaac, progeny of 2 generations of family tragedy. Mother and father pitting sons against each other, being taught to steal. That's what his family taught him to do, to steal. He spends the first half of his life running, cheating people and tricking them. He's a scoundrel. His name in Hebrew means usurper, the person who steals. But at a certain moment, he decides that he's got to go home. He's got to go back to his brother and apologize. He's so afraid that his brother's going to kill him that when he goes back, he acts the coward and puts both of his wives, all of his children, all of his servants, and all of his cattle, all the wealth he's accumulated in his life, between him and his brother. So his brother has to pass through all of that wealth and can take it all if he wants before he gets to Jacob. He uses his entire family and wealth as a body shield for himself. This guy is a jerk and a wimp. That's what he is, right? But finally, he stares face to face with his brother Esau. He turns to confront the wounds of his past in himself. He turns around, and the cycle breaks. It's not perfect. There's still problems. The cycle breaks. He finally musters the courage to face that wound and break the cycle. On the night before, this man, so hurt by his past, so caught in cycles, so prone to repeat once more the generational violence that he's inherited. In the dark of the night, with all of his wives and property and family between him and his brother for protection, coward that he is, he wrestles with his own shadow. This is the famous story of Jacob wrestling the angel, another icon of Western art. What he really does is to confront himself, to fight with himself, with his own shadow, with his own pain, with his own violence, all those things about himself that he doesn't want to see, doesn't want to be there. He deals with it. He wrestles with it. And come daybreak, he is at a standoff, wrestling with his God, wrestling with himself, wrestling with his whole life, not just obeying, not just giving in, grabbing hold of all that he's inherited and not letting go until finally God or angel or whatever it is that he's wrestling with strikes him with a wound that he'll carry for the rest of his life. Walk with a limp the rest of his life, bearing a wound. But with the wound comes a blessing. This man Jacob, wrestling down God himself, wrestling down God herself, wrestling down himself, is given a new name. He's called Israel, a name which means wrestler with God and people. Not person who obeys and sacrifices his own children, Not person who's a coward and runs away. Not person caught in tragedy. Person who turns around and faces what is worse in life and wrestles it down. That's his name. And his name is given to the people that come from him for generations thereafter. When we talk about the Jewish people, when we talk about Israel, they are wrestlers. Wrestlers. Not obedient servants. Wrestlers who turn to face what is hardest and wrestle it down. The story of Abraham and Isaac. The story of Agamemnon and Iphigenia. The story of our Western tradition is a story of a great wound. People taking advantage of each other, generation after generation, and teaching it to their children. And look at the pain that comes from it. Patriarchy, racism, violence, gun violence, poverty, environmental disaster. Can take what I want and you deal with it. And when that's been done to me, I'm going to do it to somebody else. How do we transform the whole damn Western tradition? Sounds impossible. How do we turn back all of this violence that we're caught in? How do we stop generation after generation from perpetuating what we inherited from our parents? In the darkest night, we turn to face whatever God is or isn't, whatever our shadow is, whatever our history is, to face ourselves. We grab hold of what we've inherited and we wrestle it down. We turn to face the wound. And we apologize to the people we have wounded. Say, I'm sorry. It will change everything if you will just bleeping say, I'm sorry. Face your wound. Apologize to those you have wounded. Make this world habitable for every one of us. Thank you, Mary Underwood.
Right those jewels of the skies, which in sable darkness glow, brighter in compassion's eyes, are the silent tears which flow. Sweet the fragrance from the fields, where abundant spices grow. Sweeter far is that which yields comfort to the sick and low. Grateful are those gentle dews on the greening grass which fall, far more grateful what renews comforts to the poor who call.
I'm reading an excerpt from the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, sometimes thought to be the core work. 4, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5, we admitted to ourselves, without reservation, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. 6, we were ready to accept help in letting go of all our defects of character. 7, with humility and openness, we sought to eliminate our shortcomings. 8, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. And 9, we made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others.
The reason AA meets in groups is because this is the hardest work. It is so hard because it changes everything. Turn to face your wound. Apologize to the people who you have wounded. And if you want support to do it, please come and talk to me. I'm here to do it with you. Because we can change all of this.
We have spent time together in these holy moments. Give us strength to go down the winding road till we meet again. We have spent